What would you do if you were standing in the lobby of a five-star hotel, wearing your favorite simple dress, when your fiancé's ex-wife grabbed your hand and demanded you remove your engagement? What would you do if she looked at the modest antique band with its small stone and actually laughed out loud, saying, "This cheap garbage isn't fit for a woman of our family. Take it off right now, and I'll dispose of it"? What would you do if a crowd of hotel guests gathered to watch, and your fiancé's ex-wife reached for your finger with her perfectly manicured nails, trying to physically remove the ring from your hand? I stood very still in that marble lobby, my heart pounding, and I let her try. Because what Vanessa Hartwell didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly imagined, was that in exactly 6 minutes, 8 royal security vehicles would pull up to the hotel entrance, 20 armed guards would enter the building, and she would be formally detained for attempting to steal property belonging to Her Royal Highness, Crown Princess Alexandra of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. The ring she was calling cheap garbage was a historically significant royal artifact worth approximately $30 million. But she didn't know that, and I wasn't ready to. Let me take you back to where this started, because the beginning mattered. The beginning is where I made the choice that led to this lobby, this moment, this ending that Vanessa was about to discover. My name, the name I'd been using for 2 years in Boston, was Sophie. Sophie Laurent was 31 years old, worked as a rare book curator at the Boston Public Library, lived in a small apartment in the South End, and took the subway to work every morning with her coffee in a reusable cup and a book in her. Sophie Laurent bought her clothes at J. Crew and Vintage. She had a library and student loan debt and a budget spreadsheet My actual is Her Royal Highness Alexandra Sophie Marie of Luxembourg, Crown Princess and heir apparent to the Grand Duchy, only child of Grand Duke Henri and Grand Duchess Maria. My family had ruled Luxembourg for over 2 centuries. Our private fortune, built on strategic investments and careful stewardship over generations, was conservatively estimated at €80 billion. I'd grown up in the Grand Ducal, educated by the finest tutors, trained in 7 languages, and prepared from birth to one day govern. By the time I was 28, I'd attended over 400 official functions. I'd been photographed by every major patient in Europe. I'd been proposed to by 3 2 heirs to industry, and 1 son. All of them had known exactly who I was before they'd ever. All of them had seen me as a strategic alliance, a beneficial marriage, a means to an end. None of them had ever asked me what I was afraid of when I woke up at 3 in the morning. None of them knew that I cried watching old films, or that I'd wanted to work with books since I was 2 years old. I'd gone to my father 3 years ago with a proposal that had alarmed my security and disturbed the palace protocol. I wanted to disappear. Not forever, but long enough to live as an ordinary, long enough to see if someone could love me without knowing about the crown, or the fortune, or the title. My father, who'd married my mother in an arranged marriage that had evolved into genuine love over 30 years, had understood in a way I hadn't expected. 2 years, he'd said. You can have 2 years. Minimal security coverage, weekly check-ins, and the moment I summon you home, you return immediately. Agreed? Agreed, I'd said. So Sophie Laurent had been created. A complete identity, carefully documented, with employment history and credit history, and a past that would survive casual investigation. I'd moved to Boston because it was far from Europe and large enough to disappear. I'd gotten the curator position through legitimate application. I'd rented my apartment through normal channels. I'd built a real life, and for 2 years, I'd been genuinely happy. I met David Hartwell at a lecture on medieval manuscripts at Harvard. He was sitting in the back row, asking intelligent questions about preservation tech, and afterward, he'd approached me at the wine reception with 2 plastic cups of terrible wine. You looked like you were actually interested in the topic, he'd said, offering. Most people here are just network fulfilling. I work with manuscripts at the Boston Public Library. So you care about 13th century binding method? Passionate, I'd said, and he'd smiled, and that was the beginning. David was 43, a software entrepreneur who'd built and sold 2 successful companies and now worked as a consultant helping other startups. He'd been married before, he told me on our 3rd date, to a woman named Vanessa who'd wanted the lifestyle his success provided, but not the person he actually. They'd divorced 5 years. He had an 8-year-old daughter named Emma from that. He was honest about the complications. I'd appreciated the honesty. I'd been planning to tell him my own truths eventually. David was different from anyone. He was thoughtful without being performative. He asked about my work and listened to the. He took me to neighborhood restaurants and independent. He introduced me to Emma after we'd been dating for 6 months, a serious step that he approached with appropriate gravity. Emma was brilliant and funny and loved books almost as much as I did. We bonded over a shared passion for historical fiction and a mutual of Brussels sprouts. She started calling me Sophie's good books, which eventually, Sophie, but said with such affection that it made. David proposed on a Sunday morning in my apartment, after we'd made breakfast and were sitting on my second-hand couch with our coffee. No elaborate, just him, looking at me with complete sincerity, saying, "Sophie, I want to build a life with. Will you marry me?" The ring was an antique. He told me he'd found it at an estate sale, a Victorian-era piece with a small rose-cut diamond in a delicate gold setting. It had cost him $800, which he'd saved carefully, because his money was largely tied up in investments, and he wanted to choose the ring himself, rather than. I'd said yes, because I loved the life we were building, a life where I was Sophie, curator, not princess, heir to. That was 8 months ago, and for 8 months, I'd been planning to tell Dave. I'd been working up to it, imagining the conversation, trying to find the right moment. But before I could tell him, I met Vanessa, and Vanessa made very clear what she thought of me. The first incident happened at Emma's birthday, held at David's. I'd arrived early wearing jeans and a sweater, carrying the present I'd spent weeks, a first edition of Emma's favorite, something I'd found through my life. Vanessa had arrived late, in full designer art, head-to-toe Chanel, carrying a bag that I recognized as a limited edition Birkin worth at least $30,000. She'd looked at me, at my jeans and my sweater, and my carefully wrapped present, and something cold. "So you're Sophie, the librarian David's been curator," I'd corrected. "I work with rare books and—" "How quaint," she'd said, in a tone that made quaint sound like an insult. "And you met David at some academic function, I understand? A lecture on medieval manuscripts. Of course she'd smiled, but it wasn't. "Well, I hope you're enjoying your time with David, and I'm sure it's very different. David does try to date outside his usual circle. He thinks it keeps him." She'd said it like I was a phase, a charitable act, something temporary. David had come over there, had tried to smooth things over, but the damage was done. Vanessa had assessed me and found me wanting, and she'd made sure I knew it. The second incident, David had invited me to a charity where his company's a sponsor. It was black tie, and I'd bought a dress for a simple but elegant floor-length gown in blue. I'd thought I looked appropriate. Vanessa had. She was always at these events, part of the social circuit of Boston's wealthy. She'd been wearing what I recognized as a custom Valentino gown, probably $50,000, with jewelry that sparkled under the ballroom chandelier. She'd spotted me across the room and made her way over with 2 of her friends, women who looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. "Sophie," her voice carrying just loud enough. "What a love. Is it vintage? It has that sort of thrifted charm to it." It wasn't vintage, but she'd made it sound like a flaw. "And your jewelry," one of her friends had, looking at the simple pearl earrings, "so understated. I always think it's brave when women choose not to accessorize. It shows confidence." They'd circled me like shark, making comments about my shoes, my hair, my make. Every observation framed as a compliment, but delivered as criticism. David had been across the room, networking with potential clients, oblivious. When I'd told him later how they'd treated me, he'd said, "Vanessa's just competitive. She doesn't like that I've moved on. Don't let her get, don't," as if it was my responsibility. The third incident was the engagement. David's parents had on hosting their country, a formal affair with 100 guests. I'd met his parents twice before, and they'd been cordial if somewhat reserved. His mother kept asking about my family, about my background, clearly trying to assess whether I was appropriate. I'd stuck to the Sophie Laurent story, small town in upstate New York. Parents would, state school for undergraduate degree in library science from a good program. David's mother had smiled at how nice they looked so hard. The engagement party had been full of David's parents' friends, his former colleague, people from his social circle. Vanessa had been there with her current boy, a hedge fund manager, who looked bored and checked his phone constantly. I'd worn a cocktail dress I'd found on sale at Nordstrom, something I'd thought was perfectly appropriate. Vanessa had been in Dior, her friends in Gucci and Prada, and I'd watched them exchange glances. "Sophie," Vanessa had said, approaching me near the bar, her voice was poison. "I wanted to talk to you, woman to woman." "All right," I'd said. "I know David hasn't been entirely forthcoming about the financial. He likes to play the humble on, but the truth is he's quite well. The divorce settlement alone was substantial, and Emma's trust fund." She'd paused, watching. "I just want to make sure you understand what you're walking into. David needs someone who can handle that, someone who's comfortable with the lifestyle, someone who—" She'd looked at my dress, my shoes, my simple engagement ring. "Someone who fits." "I appreciate your concern," I'd said, "but David and I are fine." "Are you? Because I've been watching. You look uncomfortable. You look out of place." And I think she'd leaned. "David's settling because he's lonely, but eventually he's going to want someone, a partner, not someone he—" She'd walked away before I could respond. I'd found David and asked him to take me home early. When he'd asked why, I'd said I had a headache. I hadn't told him what Vanessa had said, because I'd known what he'd say, that she was jealous, that I should ignore her, that it didn't matter, but it did. Because Vanessa represented a truth that I was lying about, and eventually those lies would become a problem. I'd been planning to tell David everything. I'd been working up the courage for. I'd contacted my father's office, begun the process of arranging a formal meeting where I could reveal my identity properly, with appropriate context. But before I could do that, Vanessa made her final move. She'd called David 3 days ago, said she needed to meet with him to discuss something important regarding him. David had asked me to come along, said he wanted to be transparent. We'd arranged to meet at the Four Seasons, neutral territory, somewhere public. I'd arrived at the hotel wearing my favorite dress, a simple navy, comfortable and professional. I'd brought nothing else, hadn't anticipated needing any. Vanessa had been waiting in the lobby, but she hadn't been alone. She'd brought 2 of her friends, the women from the gala, clearly there for backup and audience. And when she'd seen me, seen my simple dress, and my simple shoes, and my simple engagement ring, something predatory had lit up in her. "Sophie," she'd said loud, drawing the attention of everyone, "I'm so glad you. I wanted to talk to you about something for David." "What is it?" I'd asked. "It's about that ring you're wearing." She'd gestured to my left hand, to the Victorian antique David had chosen with such care. "I've been thinking about it, and I've realized it's completely inappropriate. David can't have his fiancée walking around wearing something that looks like costume. It reflects poorly on Emma, on our entire family." "It's not costume," I'd said. "It's an antique. David chose it specific." "David doesn't. He never had." She'd smiled at her friends, who'd smiled back. "That's what he had, and now he has no one, so he's making embarrassed like that, like you." The insult had landed. I'd felt it like a physical. "So here's what's going. Vanessa, you're going to take off cheap garbage, and I'm going to dispose of it. And then, I'm going to take you shopping and get you something appropriate, something that won't embarrass David when you're seen in public." She'd reached for my hand. That's when I'd pulled out my phone. Not my regular, the secure phone I kept for emergency, the one with a direct line to my security deal. And I'd sent a single message, in French, that would change everything. Immediate extraction, Four Seasons Hotel. Authorization code, Palais 1. Subject, attempted theft of royal property. The response had come in seconds. Confirmed, team deploying, ETA, 6 minutes. I'd looked at Vanessa, at her perfectly made-up face and her designer clothes, and her absolute certainty that she had the power. "You should step back," I'd said. "Excuse me?" I said, "Step back. Don't touch." Vanessa had laughed, actually, looking at her friends for confirmation that this was as absurd as it seemed. "Or what? You'll call hotel security? Sophie, you're embarrassing yourself. Just take off the ring and let's handle this like adults." "I'm not taking off my ring," I'd said, "and you're going to want to leave, right now, before this gets significantly worse for Vanessa's. Sophie, you're a librarian dating a man worth 50 million. You have no power here, no position, no status. You're nobody. And you're wearing a ring that probably costs less than mine. So stop pretending you have any say in this and take it off." She'd reached for my hand again. That's when the first vehicle had pulled up outside. A black armored SUV with diplomatic plates, moving with the purposeful certainty of something that knew it had every legal exactly. Then, the second vehicle, the third. By the time the 8th had arrived, a crowd had gathered in the hotel lobby, guests and staff alike watching through the window as a convoy of diplomatic vehicles took up positions around. Vanessa had stopped reading my hand. She'd turned to look at the confusion beginning to cross her face. "What is this?" she'd said. "What did you do?" "I called my security detail," I'd said simply. "They're here to address the situation." "Your security detail?" "Sophie, what are you talking about?" The hotel's front doors had opened. Through them had come 20 people in dark suits, moving with military precision. Half took up positions around the lobby, half moved directly toward where we stood. The lead agent, a man named Laurent, who'd been with my family's security for 15 years, had approached me and bowed slightly. "Your Royal Highness," he'd said in French, "we received your distress signal. Are you unharmed?" Vanessa's face had done something extraordinary. All the color had drained from, leaving her makeup stark against suddenly pale skin. "Your Royal Highness?" she'd repeat. "What is he talking about?" I'd looked at this woman who'd spent months making me feel small, who'd just tried to physic my ring, who'd called me nobody, with such absolute conviction. "My name," I'd said, "is not Sophie Laurent. Sophie Laurent is a name I've been using while living privately in Boston. My actual name is Alexandra Sophie Marie of Luxembourg. I'm Crown Princess and heir to the Grand Duchy. That ring you just tried to steal is the Lumiere Rose, a historically significant my family since 18. It features a rare pink diamond and is valued at approximately 30. Vanessa had gone at least still. "The ring," I'd continued, "is registered with Interpol as protected royal property. Attempting to remove it from my person without permission constitutes attempted theft of a royal artifact under international law, which is why my security team is here." I'd turned to this woman attempted to physically remove the Lumiere Rose from my hand. She declared her intention to dispose of it, believing it to be worthless costume. "I'd like this incident formally documented." "Yes, Your Highness." Laurent had pulled out a tablet, already recording. "Can you identify the individual who attempted this?" "Vanessa Hartwell," I'd said, "ex-wife of my fiancé. She's been informed multiple times that I'm engaged, and that this ring is my engagement." given to me by David Hartwell. She chose to. Vanessa had finally found her. This is insane. You can't be a. You work at a library. You take the subway. You live in a tiny apartment. This is some kind of joke. It's not a joke, Laurent had said, his voice flat and professional. We've been providing security coverage for Her Royal Highness for 2 years during her private residency in Boston. We have full documentation of her activities, her residence, and her relationship, including her relationship with Mr. Hartwell and her multiple encounters. He gestured to another agent who'd stepped forward with a folder. We have recordings and photographs of 3 previous where you made disparaging comments, Her Highness, including one incident where you explicitly stated that she was nobody and didn't belong in Mr. Hartwell's socials. Vanessa's friends had started backing away, clearly wanting to distance themselves from whatever was happening. This isn't legal, Vanessa had said desperate. You can't just record people without their knowledge. Diplomatic security operations are governed by different regulations than standard civilian surveillance, Laurent had said. When protecting a member of a royal family, we have broad authority to monitor threats and document incidents. You've been flagged as a threat to Her Royal Highness's safety. I'd had no idea in tracking. Now, Laurent had, you have 2. You can leave this hotel immediately and have no further contact with Her Royal Highness or Mr. Hartwell. Or we can proceed with formal charges for attempted theft of royal property, which would involve Luxembourg's diplomatic corps, the U.S. State Department, and likely result in criminal charges. Vanessa had looked around at the crowd, at her friends who'd abandoned her, at the security team surrounding her, at me, standing there in my simple dress, wearing a ring she'd called garbage that was actually worth $30 million. You lied, she'd said finally. You lied to everyone. You pretended to be someone you're not. I lived privately. I didn't pretend to be anything. I simply didn't announce my title. You assumed I was nobody because I didn't wear designer labels and drive an expensive car. You assumed I had no power because I worked a job I loved rather than living off family money. You were wrong. David doesn't know, does he? Vanessa's voice had taken on a desperate edge. He has no idea who you really are. You've been lying to him all time. I've been planning to but before I could, you decided to try to steal my. So now we're here. That's when David had walked into the. He'd stopped at the entrance, staring at the security the vehicles outside, the crowd, me standing in the center of it all with Vanessa looking pale and cornered. Sophie? He'd called out. What's happening? I'd looked at this man I loved, who was about to learn that everything he thought he knew about me. David, I'd said, we need to talk. David walked toward us, moving slowly through the crowd that had gathered, his eyes moving from me to the security team to Vanessa's stricken face and back to me. His expression was cycling through confusion, concern, and something that looked like the beginning of understanding that something fundamental. Sophie, what's going on? He said again when he reached us. Why are there armed guards in the hotel lobby? Why does everyone look like... He stopped, finally seeming to process what Laurent had called me. Did that man just call you Your Royal Highness? Yes, I said simply. He did. I don't understand. David, I said, keeping my voice calm despite my name isn't so, not entire. Sophie is my middle name, and Laurent is part of my actual surname, but my full name is Alexandra Sophie Marie of Luxembourg. I'm Crown Princess of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. I've been living in Boston privately for the past, and I've been planning to tell you the truth for months. But Vanessa David just stared at, his mouth open, closed, opened. No sound came. Vanessa, however, had found her. You see, she said, turning to David with desperate triumph. She's been lying to you this whole. She's been pretending to be someone. Everything about your relationship is built on deception. I wasn't pretending, I said sharply, turning back to Vanessa. I was living quietly. There's a difference. I worked a real job. I lived in a real apartment. I built a real relation. The only thing I didn't do was announce my family's wealth. And frankly, given how you've treated me for the past 8, I'm glad You had no right to deceive him. Vanessa spat. David deserves someone real. Someone you approved of, you mean, I corrected. Someone from your social circle. Someone you could control. That's what this has always been about, Vanessa. Not David's, your control. Laurent stepped forward. Ms. Hartwell, I'm going to ask you one more time. This is a diplomatic, and your presence is complicated. I'm not going anywhere until David tells, Vanessa said, crossing her. I have every right to be. We share a daughter. I have a stake in who he chooses. You have no stake in my personal, David said, finally finding him. It was quiet but firm. We've been divorced for 5 years, Vanessa. You don't get a vote. He turned to me, and I could see him doing the mental, reassessing everything. You're really an actual crown prince. Yes. And the ring? He looked down at my left hand, at the Victorian band he'd been so proud to. What about the ring? The ring is called the Lumiere Rose, I said. It's been in my family since 1867. My great-great-great-grandmother has her engagement. It's been worn by 5 generations of women in my family. When I came to Boston, I brought it with me, because it was the one piece of jewelry I couldn't bear to leave. It reminds me of who I am. But I bought you a ring, David said slowly, at an estate sale, for 800. You did, and I loved that you did. But David, I couldn't wear that, not because it wasn't expensive enough, but because I was already wearing. The Lumiere rose isn't just jewelry, it's a family heirloom, it's registered property. I've been wearing it on my right hand for years, and when you proposed, I moved it to my left hand, because that's where it's meant to be worn, by the woman who will one day be Grand Duchess. David looked like he'd been hit with a brick. So when I proposed to you with my grandmother's ring, I appreciated the gesture more than you'll ever, but I couldn't not when I was already wearing a ring that means everything. So I quietly returned your grandmother's ring to the jeweler and wore the Lumiere rose in. I was going to tell you the truth about when I told you everything. When were you planning to tell me the hurt in? Soon. I'd already contacted my father. I was arranging for us to visit Luxembourg. I was going to I promise you, I would never have. But you let me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist, he said. I exist, I said firmly. Sophie, I'm not two different people. I'm one person with a complicated. Everything we shared was real. My feelings were, the life we was real. The only thing I kept from was the context of where I come from. Everything else, my love for you, for Emma, my job at the library, our Sunday morning breakfast, all of that was completely genuine. Vanessa laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. You really believe? David, she's royalty. She owns cars. She has billions, and she's been playing dress-up as a middle-class librarian. Everything about her life here performance. It's not my voice. I chose to because I love books, and I chose David because he saw me as Sophie, brilliant, funny, passionate about manuscript, not as a strategic alliance or a beneficial. I turned back to, I'm sorry I should have, but I was afraid. I was afraid you'd see me. I was afraid of losing. You should have been more afraid of lying, Vanessa, because now you've lost it anyway. Vanessa, shut up, David said, and there was steel in it I'd never heard before. This is between me and Sophie. It has nothing. It has everything. I'm Emma's mother. I have a right to know who you're planning to, and you're planning to. Every book I've read with her, every conversation we've had, every time I've helped her with homework, or listened to her talk about her day, all of that was real. I'm the same person to her that I've always been. Except you're not, Vanessa said. You're a princess. Changes. Emma needs, David needs, everyone. What I really am, I said, is a woman who wanted to be loved for herself. That's all I've ever. And for 2 years, I had it. I had a job I loved, and a man who loved me, and a little girl who I had a real. And you, Vanessa, trying to destroy that, because you couldn't stand that. I looked. Show her the document. All of it. Laurent nodded, and handed his tablet. Mr. Hart, these are records of Ms. Vanessa with her royal highness. We've documented 12 separate incidents of deliberate provocation, verbal harassment, and social humiliation. Today's incident, where she attempted to physically remove the Lumiere rose from Her Highness's hand while declaring it worthless and threatening to dispose of it, constitutes attempted theft of royal property under both U.S. and international law. David scrolled through the documentation, his face darkening. You've been doing this for 8 months? All these comments? All these little digs? This was documented? We document all threats to Her Royal Highness's safety and well-being, Laurent said. Ms. Hartwell has been classified as a low-level but persistent threat since your relationship with Her Highness became serious. I'm not a threat, Vanessa protested. I was trying to protect David from making a mistake, from marrying someone completely inappropriate. You called her a nobody, David said, still looking at the tablet. You told her she didn't belong. You told her she was embarrassing me. You told her she should leave before I realized I'd made a mistake. He looked up, and his eyes were furious. You told her all of this, multiple, in front of other people. I was trying to help. You were trying to hurt her, David, and you were trying to make her feel small, and today, you tried to steal her ring. A ring worth $30 million that you assumed was cheap garbage because it didn't look expensive enough to a trained eye. He handed the tablet back to Laurent and turned to me. Sophie, Alexandra, whoever you are, I need time to process this. But right now, I need to deal with. He gestured to Vanessa. And I need you to know that whatever happens between us, whatever we figure out about your identity and our relation, this, he pointed to the document, is not okay. What she did to you is not okay. He turned to Vanessa. We're done. Completely done. You're going to leave this hotel right now. You're going to have no further contact with Sophie, and you're going to understand that the next time you see Emma, it will be at a scheduled custody exchange with no additional commentary. Are we clear? David, you can't just... Are we clear? Vanessa looked at him, then at me, then at the security team surrounding her. Something in her face crumpled. You're really choosing her? After she lied to you? After she deceived everyone? I'm choosing to give her a chance to explain, David, which is more than you deserve. Now leave. Vanessa's 2 friends. Vanessa looked around the lobby one more, at all the phones, at the humiliation that was being documented in real time, and would probably be. This isn't over, but it is, Laurence. And Ms. Hartwell, Understand this. If you make any further contact with Her Royal Highness, if you make any public statements about her, if you attempt in any way to damage her reputation or interfere with her relationship with Mr. Hartwell, the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg will pursue formal charges. We have diplomatic standing, we have documentation, and we have resources you cannot imagine. Do not test her. Vanessa walked away, not proudly, not defiantly. Just walked away with her shoulders hunched and her head down, past the crowd of hotel guests who parted to let her. The lobby slowly began to clear. The security team maintained their position, but relaxed slightly. Laurent stepped back to give David and me. David looked at 30. The ring I thought was from an estate sale at 30. Yes, and you're a crown. Yes, with castles and billions of euros and a whole life I knew nothing of. Yes, he ran his hands through his hair. I need to sit down. We moved to one of the hotel's sitting areas, a quiet corner away from the remaining onlook. Laurent and his team maintained a discreet perimeter. David sat heavily in one of the upholds. Tell me everything, from the beginning. So I told all of it. About growing up in the Grand Duke, about the weight of being the only, about the arranged and the strategic proposal, and the loneliness of being seen as a crown rather than a person, about asking my father for 2 years of anonymity, about building Sophie Laurent's life carefully, and about choosing Boston because it was far from, and choosing the library because I genuinely, about meeting him at that lecture and falling in love with the way he asked questions about me. I was going to I said again, I was just waiting for the right. And what happens now, David? Assuming I can get past the fact that you've been lying to me 2 years. Living privately, I correct. Not lying. There's a difference. Fine. Living privately. What happens now? Do you go back to Luxembourg? Do I visit you in a palace? Do we have diplomatic dinners and state functions? How does this work? However we want it. David, I'm still me. I still love books. I still love you. I still love Emma. My title didn't change. It just adds context. It's not just context. It's your entire life. You're going to be Grand Duchess. You'll rule a country. Where do I fit in? Where does Emma fit? Beside me, I said simply. If you want to. David, I didn't fall in love with you despite who. I fell in love with you because of who. Smart and kind and thoughtful. A good father. Someone who values substance status. I need that, especially given the life. And Emma, what happens if we get married? She becomes my family. She'll have protection, education, opportunities she wouldn't have otherwise. But more importantly, have me. The same me I'm not going. David was quiet. Then, I'm going to need. It's a lot. I know. And I'm going to need you to be complete. No more living private if we're going to make this. Agreed, I said. He stood up. I need to go. I need to think. Can we talk tomorrow? Of course. He started to walk away, then turned back. Sophie, Alexandra, that ring, the one you're wearing. Did you really move it to your left hand? That's where it's supposed to be. Yes. And when I proposed with my grandmother's ring, you couldn't tell me you were already wearing your own family's engagement ring, because that would have meant telling me everything else. He nodded slowly. That's why you looked so sad when I thought it was just emotion, but you were sad because you knew you'd return my ring and wear your own, and eventually I'd find out. He stopped. That's a lot of weight to. I'm sorry for not such, Vanessa, for making you couldn't tell. He left, and I sat in that hotel sitting area, surrounded by my security team, wearing a $30 million ring and a dress from J. Crew, and I felt the full weight of what had just happened settling. My phone buzzed, a text. Dad just called and said you're a princess. Is that true? That's so cool. Can I come visit your castle? I smiled despite. At least Emma was. Laurent approached quietly. Your Highness, we should move you to a secure location. The Grand Duke has been notified of and requests that you call him at your earliest convenience. Of course. I stood up. Laurent, thank you for the document, for tracking Vanessa's behavior, for coming when It's our job, and if I may say so, you handled that situation. Your mother would. My mother. Dead 12 years now, but still the standard by which I measured. I thought about what she would have said about. She'd have had choice words for Vanessa, that was certain. But she'd also have understood the choice I'd made to live private, to seek love. The convoy took a secure apartment. The consulate maintained exactly. My father. Alexandra, he said, in the particular tone he used when he was trying very hard to be. Laurent briefed me on the incident. Are you all right? I'm fine, Father. And Mr. Hartwell? How did he take the revelation? He's processing. We're going to talk tomorrow. There was a long pause. Do you love him? Actually, not just the idea of him. I do. And the child? Emma? I love her. Then we'll work it out. If he's the man we'll find a way to make. But Alexandra, no more secret. If you're serious about this man, if you want to marry him and bring him into our family, he needs to know all of it. The good and the Agreed? Agreed. Good. Now, about Ms. Laurent says she attempted to steal. Do you want to press charge? I thought about Vanessa, about the humiliation she'd just suffered in that hotel, documented by dozens of phones, probably already spreading about the diplomatic rebuke about David's fate. Seen the documentation. No, she suffered enough, and pressing charges. I wanted her. Very well. But Alexandra, understand that he attempted. If she makes any further, we will act decisive. 3 days later, David and I met at. He'd spent the time reading about luck, about the Grand Ducal, about me, or rather, about Crown Princess Alexandra, whose life was documented in hundreds of articles and photographs. You really did grow up in a palace, he said, showing me his phone with pictures of the Grand Ducal Palace in Luxembourg. I did. And you really do speak 7 languages. 8, actually. I learned Mandarin. And you're really, actually going to be Grand, unless something catastrophic. Yes. He put down his phone and looked at, the woman I met at that lecture, the woman who got excited about 13th century binding techniques and cried during Pixar movies and made terrible puns about literary. That woman was real, right? Completely real. And she still exists, even with the crown and the title and the billions of. She's sitting right. David was quiet. Then, Emma wants to know if she can be a princess too. I laughed, despite the. If we get married, she'll have a courtesy title. She won't be a princess by blood, but she'll be part of the family. And yes, she can visit the as often. And me? What do I become if I? My husband, my part, prince consort, if you want the formal. But mostly just the person I love who happens to be married to someone with a complicated job. David repeated. That's one way to describe ruling a country. It's what it is. David, I know this is enormous. I know it's not what you signed up for when you proposed to Sophie Laurent, librarian. But I'm asking you to seep the title and the wealth and the protocol to the person who wants to build a. Can you do? He took my left, the one wearing the Lumiere, looked at the ring that had caused so much trouble. It really is. I can't believe I didn't notice the craftsman, the quality of the stone. You saw what you expected to see, I said. An antique ring from an estate sale. That's what I told you it was. So that's what you saw. But David, I never lied. I know, and that's why I'm still here. Because even with everything that's happened, even with the shock and the feeling like I don't know you at all, there's this other part of me that knows exactly who. The woman who reads to Emma every Tuesday night. The woman who makes terrible coffee and burns. The woman who cried when I proposed because she was happy and sad at the same time. That woman, I know, and that woman, I love. So what does that mean? I asked. It means we figure it out together. It means you introduce me to your father, and I probably completely embarrass myself. It means Emma gets to visit a castle, and I learn royal protocol, and we navigate this incredibly weird situation as best we can. He squeezed my hand. It means I'm willing to. I am, I said. Absolutely. Good. Because Vanessa's already on social media claiming she was assaulted by foreign security, and I'm going to need your help dealing with the fallout. I pulled out my phone and showed him the statement the Luxembourg consulate had released that morning. It included footage from hotel security cameras showing Vanessa attempting to grab my hand, paired with a formal explanation of why diplomatic security had responded to an attempted theft of royal property. She's being destroyed in the comments. People are not sympathetic to a woman who tried to steal a ring and then claimed assault when she got caught. Good, David. She's caused enough trouble. We talked for 3 hours that day about logistics and expectations and how this would actually work, about telling Emma the full truth, about when I'd need to return to Luxembourg to resume my official duties, about whether David would come with me or stay in Boston with Emma, and how we'd navigate the day he stayed. In the end, we agreed on a gradual transition. I'd finish out my David would visit Luxembourg with Emma during her next school break. We'd introduce him to my father formally. We'd see how it felt, how they adapted, whether this impossible thing could actually work. And 6 months later, when David proposed again, this time knowing exactly proposing, I said, again. True power, I learned on that hotel lobby, isn't about wealth or title, or how many security guards respond when. True power is knowing who you are so completely that other people's attempts to diminish you simply bounce off. It's standing in a simple dress, wearing a priceless ring, while someone calls you nobody, and knowing with absolute certainty that they're wrong. It's having the confidence privately, because you don't need, and it's finding who can see past the crown and the billion, the protocol, to the person, and choose. Vanessa learned that lesson when her attempt to humiliate me backfired spectacularly, when footage of her trying to steal a royal artifact went viral, when every social door she'd spent years keeping open slammed shut in her face. She learned it when David was no longer welcoming, when the diplomat of an entire nation documented and made it clear that consequence. She thought she had power because she had money and status and a place in Boston society. She'd learned that real power comes from integrity, from treating people with respect, regardless of who you think they are, from understanding that the quiet woman in the simple might be someone whose family 2 centuries. What did you think of this perfect example of karma and royal justice? Did Vanessa Hartwell get exactly what she deserved when she tried to steal a $30 million ring she thought was worthless and ended up facing diplomatic charges? Did you feel the satisfaction when Crown Princess Alexandra's security team documented every comment and every humiliation, and then presented it all as evidence of harassment? If you loved watching an arrogant ex-wife learn that the nobody librarian was actually royalty, with the power to end her social with a single phone call, then smash that like button. Share this with everyone who's ever been underestimated by someone who judged them by their clothes instead of their character. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss another of hidden crown, devastating consequences, and the moment when people mistake humility for weakness. Learn they've made the worst